Hi guys, welcome to Friday. I am Georgia Beers, in case none of you heard that. I am a romance writer and I am going to moderate today, speaking to 6 wonderful authors about writing happily ever afters, or not writing happily ever afters, or whether or not they want to write a happily ever after, or whether you want a happily ever after. We're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about what it takes to do that, how we all feel about happily ever afters, and I want to hear what you guys want to ask. So at the bottom of your screen, first of all, there's a chat bar where you can talk to each other off on the right-hand side, and there's also a Q&A section. So if you put your questions in there that you want me to ask the authors, I will keep track of those as we go along, and I will ask your questions to my wonderful panel. So first thing we're going to do is I am going to have the panelists introduce themselves, because I always find that a little more fun and a little more interesting, and we get a little taste of what each person is like. So let's start with Kris Bryant. Tell us about you.
Hello, I'm Kris Bryant. I live in Kansas City, and I love to write romance. I love to talk about romance. I am a hopeless romantic as well, so I'm excited for this panel. So,
excellent. Ann Shade, talk to us.
Hi everyone, I'm Ann Shade. I'm in New Jersey. Like Kris, I'm a hopeless romantic. I love happily ever afters, so everything I write has a happily ever after. There's a lot of drama in between, but it ends happily. And that's it. I have no witty things to say about myself.
That's all right. We will get there. You give us
okay.
Lee Patton.
Hi, I'm Lee Patton. I live in Denver. I'm not a romance writer, so I'm very curious about why I'm on this panel, and I'm wondering why. Maybe I'm the token male, and my books do have a romantic element to them, but I wouldn't call them romances. And as far as happily ever after, well, I'm anxious to talk about that. But I've sold 4 novels. I've written many more, and each one of them has a romantic element to it. Let me put it that way.
So you are kind of a romance writer, and when you leave, by the time you leave this panel, you'll be writing full-blown romance. That's our plan. We are.
Well,
that's
one of the reasons.
That's really why we're having this panel, because we're going to switch you to be a romance writer.
No, that's great, but I'm open to that. But Georgia, I'm sorry for interrupting. I want to learn a little bit about this genre.
Perfect.
Because I know almost nothing except for the 19th century novels I read in college, like Jane Austen. Other than that, I have a lot to learn. And I was reading the panelists' bios before we started, and I'm even more fascinated because there's some really interesting folks on this panel.
Well, we hope you learn, Lee. Melissa Brayden.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I write, I guess, fun, flirty, contemporary romance novels. I like kissing scenes and donuts, and I think I have 17 books out now, if I'm correct about that, and counting. So I do write romance, so I'm very much looking forward to discussing the ins and outs and making Lee Patton a believer.
Perfect. Morgan Lee Miller, talk to us.
I'm Morgan Lee Miller. I am in DC. I am a romance writer. I've been with Bold Strokes Books for only a year. I'm very excited to be on this panel. Melissa Brayden was my first lesfic book.
Get out!
Melissa Brayden was a lot of people's first.
So I am very, very excited to be on here. Strawberry Summer was my first one, so
yay!
It brought me into this world.
Awesome.
Nice. And Donna K. Ford, tell us about you.
Well, I'm living in one of the corona hotspots of East Tennessee, so yay. But that means I'm at home today, so I'm really, really enjoying that, and I'm looking forward to talking about the happily ever after and all the angst that comes in between. I don't know if I would really be having a lot of fun with it if there wasn't the happily ever after at the end, so I'm glad to be here.
Perfect. That makes me happy. All right. Well, let's get started on some questions. I'm going to point out that for many of us, it's happy hour. So you will see some of us sipping our drinks. That's okay. I hope that all of you also have happy hour cocktails. That will make me very happy. All right. So first of all, you guys, let's start with Morgan Lee Miller, because you are a newbie to me and I want to know about you. So tell me, what makes a great romance for you as a reader?
As a reader, I love the chemistry. I want the chemistry to fly off the page. I want to connect to the characters, so believable characters, well-rounded characters. I want to be teased a little bit. I don't want the characters to get together like a fourth of the way in. It's kind of like, for me, reading a romance novel is like dating someone for the first time. When you go on that first date, second date, like, is this the day that I'm going to kiss them? I want that with every chapter. And so I want to kind of be dragged along. I want that tension to build.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Kris?
Agreed. The whole build up, the tension, the dialogue. I like reading believable dialogue. I think it's cute. If I get invested in the story and I sit there and I find myself smiling at a book, then I know that the writer really did a good job of bringing me along on their journey.
Melissa?
From a reading perspective, I have to not just fall in love with the characters, which I think is step one, is we want to fall in love with the characters, right? But when a romance is truly successful, I've fallen in love with the relationship itself. And I know that it's our job as romance writers to take that relationship, and I almost think of it as a tower. And I think I've said this before in other panels. We are building a tower as high as we can with that relationship. And when we knock it down, I need my heart to be broken and I need to mourn for that lost relationship. So I think for me, we have to spend some time on the page with a couple to kind of get to see what they're like together. I need to experience them when they're happy so that when you rip it away from me, my little heart can be crushed. And then you can build it back up later and then it's all great.
I agree. Lee, what about you? Do you read romance at all?
Like I was saying, just the stuff that I read in college, like the classics.
Yeah.
Like I guess the granddaddy of all, or grandmother of all romance novels would be Pride and Prejudice, right?
Yep.
And I've read it several times. I'm always rooting, for the lovers, even though I know exactly what's going to happen.
Yep.
I'm always, shocked and horrified when there are obstacles in their way. And, I guess it's that, what Melissa was just talking about, that the relationship itself becomes a character and the tensions become almost as important as the characters themselves. And you root for that romance with all your heart and soul. Again, even if you know that things are going to work out in the end, it's a matter of figuring out how the mechanics of how you go from those difficulties to that happy ending.
Nice.
It's kind of like a more troubled example would be in Middlemarch, where the heroine Dorothea gets married off to a horrible, horrible old man. And you kind of see a romance in reverse. But meanwhile, this beautiful, intelligent young woman, Dorothea, you can tell that she's madly in love with someone outside of her marriage. And as a reader, you want so badly for that adultery to take place. And you're cheering on this adultery throughout the whole novel, even though it never really happens, because you love the two characters who are going to commit it, and you despise the man that she's married to. So just using some really archaic examples, that's the best I can do.
Oh, that works. Donna, what do you think? What makes a great romance for you?
I'm going to just go along with everybody. I believe that the characters have to be believable. We have to believe in the chemistry, even if there's a lot, even through the conflict, we have to believe that the characters really would fall in love with each other, that they would work. So if I'm reading something and I'm just like, that character, there's just no way she's going to go for that, and that would really turn me away. So I have to believe that the romance is real.
And Anne, how about you?
I'm the same way. I have to believe in the characters in the romance. It has to be a realistic story. Even when you're writing fantasy, I still need to be able to think that those characters could be somebody I know or realistic in that way. I also need a little bit of drama. I don't want perfection. I don't want a perfect romance, perfect love. I need to have angst. So that would be the perfect romance for me.
I like that. All right, let's start with Melissa on this one. Why? So for people who don't know what an HEA is, HEA means happily ever after. So Melissa, why is the HEA important to a romance?
Well, because the world is a cruel, cruel place. I think happily ever after is one of the reasons that the romance industry is a billion-dollar industry, is because there's a contract between author and reader that they know that they can pick up a genre romance novel and they're going to be okay. They know that they're going to go through a lot of turmoil and a journey and some strife, and they might cry a little bit, but that author is going to take care of them because that happily ever after is agreed upon before ever cracking the spine. And so just that knowledge tucked away in the back of their brain when they're reading propels them forward. It's a safety net. And not only that, when times are tough, we need things to work out sometimes in our fictional land.
Morgan, you have something to add to that?
Melissa said it very perfectly. But no, I agree. Life is tough. And I think it's good to have that reminder that kind of the struggle with the right person is worth it. I think the ending could make or break a book, and you have two plot points that elicit the most emotions. This is the climax and the ending, and you want the person to have the right emotion when they finish your book. And usually we want them to be happy. So, yeah, it's important.
I agree. Anne Shade?
I think HEAs are important because, one, you fall in love with the characters just as much as the characters fall in love with each other, and you want to see them have a happily ever after. If you have this love story, this great love story, these people get together, and then all of a sudden some little thing breaks them apart and they never come back together, it's such a huge disappointment, at least for me. So I think it's important to give the reader that when they can become invested in the characters themselves, to give them that happily ever after.
Donna, how about you?
Kind of sticking with the believable characters, I think that the happily ever after gives people hope. You know, it's kind of building on what Melissa said, was that we're all flawed. You know, we all have things that we're working through. We're all damaged in some way. And if we can write characters that show that if you're open to possibilities, that you're open to your own growth, that you know, that happily ever after is out there for anybody.
Kris?
I was glad somebody said hope. For sure, it's hope. I mean, you pick up a book and yeah, you know that they're going to get together and there is a journey, but it also gives you hope. I mean, if you're not in a great relationship, or you're looking for a relationship, or you're looking just for an escape, I think a romance and a happily ever after book is exactly what people need. You know, it's just, it fills your heart, and you're happy because you fell in love with these people and their journey and their relationship. And I think it just gives me hope. I like Donna said, hope.
Yeah, I love that. Hope is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Lee, what about you?
Well, I'm really intrigued and persuaded by what everyone has said so far about hope, and haven't thought that much about it, the importance of giving readers and people in general hope, because as Melissa says, life is horrible and whatever. I haven't thought that way, but I'm kind of interrogating myself a little bit as a hypocrite, because I like to think of myself as this realist, and I imagine the happily ever after lovers, you know, Prince Charming and whatever, Cinderella and Cinderella, you know, 20 years later, you know, hating each other and trying to rend each other, you know, with violence or whatever, and throwing frying pans at each other, because I just know how that life is that way, that there is no happily ever after. The hypocrisy comes in for me because, just like everybody else on this panel and probably a lot of the readers, I want happily ever after. And when I'm cheering on the stories that the 19th century stories that I read, the 20th century novels that I've read, the 21st century novels, the sitcoms, the rom-coms, I always want the lovers to get together and be happy at the end.
Mhm.
So I'm really of two minds.
That's all right. And I noticed over in the chat bar that Declan Smith made an interesting comment. They said that with a romance, if there's something that hits too close to home, it's okay to absorb it in little bits because you know it's gonna be okay at the end. So it makes it a little less scary. And I never thought of that before, but I kind of like that. All right, so along the lines of the HEA, for those of you who have written for a while, those of us who have written for a while, and those of us who have been reading romance for a while, how has the HEA changed over time, do you think? Morgan, let's start with you.
Okay, well, let me backtrack. I think the whole damsel in distress has kind of gone away, which I'm excited about. Just because with the damsel in distress, it doesn't really feel like a balanced relationship. It's like the damsel is too dependent on the rescuer, and I don't think that's a good representation of a good relationship. So the last several years, I've been reading a lot of romances, which is it's great that the characters learn and grow from each other. They boost each other up. They bring out the best in each other. And so it's like a very encouraging relationship that you're reading. And I definitely think that's evolving more as time goes on.
Awesome. Kris, what do you think?
Well, I grew up reading pretty much all the straight romances. So I didn't really get into, so it's always boy, girl. It's always been that. And even still, you know, I'm rooting for them in the end, regardless, you know, love is love. And, yeah, it's changed a lot because, like Morgan said, there's more less damsel in distress, more do it for yourself, do it for love, do it for the right reasons, instead of, you know, the old classic of getting married and being a wife was like the main goal, you know, back in the day with the old romances. I used to read a lot of the historical romances, you know, the bodice rippers that you see in all the bookstores and stuff, and you get them for 10 cents anyway. But it's just changed, and I'm so glad that it's changed because not everybody's goal in life is to become a wife or the house with the picket fence or anything like that. I think it's grown more as two individuals being two individuals but still being a couple as opposed to being dependent upon one or the other. So it's grown a lot in a good way.
I agree with that. And you and Melissa have written the most books on this panel. So I'm curious how Melissa also feels. How do you feel about do you think it's changed over time?
Oh, I definitely think it's changed over time, just because we've changed over time as human beings, as a culture. And it is, just like the other said, it's a compromise now. It's two people coming together and figuring out what happily ever after looks for them as a couple, as opposed to what it looked like for them as individuals. And one person doesn't have to have all of their hopes and dreams achieved and the other one gives up. They find that happy middle ground. And I also think that the rest of their lives, it doesn't have to necessarily be like somebody gets down on a knee and there's a marriage proposal and that's how it ends. Now, it very well may end that way if it's appropriate for the characters, but it doesn't have to anymore. It can look like, you know, they're going to go backpacking in Europe together, or they're going to settle down in a lake house and figure out what their careers are going to be. They don't have to have all the answers to be happy, and that's new.
Right. Anne, how do you feel about that?
I think it's changed. I started out writing heterosexual romances, and I also started reading with the Bodice Busters, where the woman was always flowing back and the man had her in her arms. And yes. And even then, when I started writing my het romances, they were independent of each other, and their happy endings were based on, you know, like Kris said, the growth of each other, and their how they were together. So I think it's going from the damsel in distress, definitely, and to the stronger woman, and it's all about love and not saving someone.
I agree with that. And again, someone in the comments said Margaret Burris said there's always used to be an evil male. And that's not always the case anymore. There's not always that male villain to step in the way of the lesbians getting together, or I don't know, Lee, would there be a female villain stepping in the way of the men? I mean, maybe there is. I don't know.
I haven't seen it, but I'm sure it's out there.
Donna, how about you?
Well, just the fact that we're allowed to have a happily ever after now. You know, we're not having to kill off a main character, or, you know, not that we would, but, you know, I never had an opportunity to read. I wasn't a romance reader. And then, so through college, I couldn't find any of our LGBT material. So, I mean, The Well of Loneliness was my real breakthrough, and just the heart-wrenching, you know.
So bad, isn't it?
You know, I tried to reread it again later, and it still just breaks me apart. So the fact that we, you know, have grown as a society where we can write strong women characters who are allowed to love each other now, that we're allowed to have a happily ever after, is huge.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm going to ask one more of my questions because it kind of rides the coattails of this one, and then we're going to go to some of the audience questions. But so along the vein of the happily ever after changing over time, we now have the HFN, which is the happy for now. And I want to know how you guys feel about that, because some people don't like that. Some people need, like as Melissa said, they need down on one knee with the ring, or everything needs to be tied up in a big red bow. But sometimes you have, as Melissa also said, we're going to live in this lake house and figure it out. How do you guys feel about the HFN? Is that good enough for you? Donna?
Well, I think we're, you know, even if we're saying it's a happily ever after, we're really just in that moment. You know, we really don't know what the future holds or any of that. So right now we have this great optimistic view of what the relationship's going to be together, what their lives could be together. We have no idea what that's going to be, you know, 10, 20 years, 5 years, 5 minutes, you know. So I think that there's a little bit of both going on. So happy for now is just that first step.
Okay. And Anne, what do you think?
I think the happily for now and the happily ever after, at least in my books, are kind of the same thing. There is a happy ending. They do get together, but it's like they're going to take a journey now into their happily ever after. So I guess I write more happy for now. But I think that leads into the happily ever after, which is pretty much the same thing to me. That is.
Yep. Kris, how about you?
I like to think that all of my books have the happily ever after, just because they usually end up either, depending on the characters, they either end up, you know, there's a proposal. This sounds so hypocritical, but there's either like a proposal, or they move in together, or but yeah, they're taking the step, and they're both believing in the forever after, and the rest of us, the readers, are believing it too. So I mean, it has to always end on such a incredible high note in my books. You know, in my head and in my heart, they're together forever. There's they never have problems. You know, they're perfect. It's the best relationship ever, and that's, you know, and I put them away, and I know that they're doing well. So, you know, I have to believe that it's the happily ever after for them for each time I write a book.
I like it. So Lee, with your intrigue, because you write intrigue with romantic elements, do your romantic elements is happy for now good enough?
Yeah, I was really pleased to see in our panelist notes, I was really pleased to see happily for now as an option, because I understand that one. I reflected on everything I've written, all of my published novels and my unpublished ones. The characters are at that moment at the end or near the end where they're happy for now. And kind of the points that Donna and Anne made, I completely agree with, that we don't know. This is just that moment. We want to end on that moment. And 20 years from now, they might be, you know, at the skillets with each other. But right now, it's happily for now. And I'm very, I guess, committed to that. I must be, because I've done it so many times.
There needs to be no frying pans around you, Lee.
I'm not that dangerous.
Morgan, what about you?
I'm a little biased to this because my first novel, The World's Between Us, there was Happy for Now. And I think that works if maybe you're planning a sequel, which I did have. And so they had the picture perfect ending in the second book. Or if it's a period piece and then you want to go for a realistic approach, and unfortunately, like if you're writing something from the Victorian era, they're probably not going to end up together. So what was that else I was going to say? Oh, and then I feel like if you don't end with a happily ever after, the other plot point should be not relating to romance. So if it's self-discovery or something internal, that should still end as a happily after. So if it's not the romance part, it should be another aspect of that novel. So we kind of get some satisfaction from that.
Right, about finding yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Melissa, how about you? What do you think? Is it enough?
Sometimes I think it's not one size fits all. And I think that Happily for Now is a much more modern, realistic approach. And for me, I think it works best when it's been a lower angst journey and we believe that this is where they're at. But I gotta level with you. I have a preference. When I'm reading a book, I want to feel like this is their one great love. This is the person on earth that they were destined to spend the rest of their life with. And I want to believe with every fiber of my being that they have at last found each other. And even though they may not realize that they are happily ever after, that they are. And they're always going to be happy and they're always going to be together. So that is secretly my preference.
Well, and I will tell you guys that I tend to write happily for now. My last couple books have been happily for now. And Melissa has been like, well, yeah, I wish they would. It's fine.
It's fine.
All right, I want to go to a couple of the viewer questions. This is a good one. How will at all your romance and your happily ever after writing change when we are now 6 feet apart for what looks like a really long time? Kris, why don't you start us off?
It won't change for me at all. I think at some point we'll eventually get back to a normalcy like we were used to. I will always have this need to write the closeness and the first kiss and the hugging, and that's not going to change for me, I don't think. I mean, just because we're in this massive pandemic and nobody can see each other, I still, I write love and fantasy-ish, not fantasy style, but just, the fantasy of love. And that's not going to change for me. I'm going to keep writing the way I've been writing, and, with all the feels and getting the characters together. And it's going to be like it was in 1998, 2008, 2018, the beginning of 2020, because it will eventually go back to some sort of what we had before. I feel it in my heart, and I hope to God that happens. So
I'm with you.
It won't change me.
Lee, what do you think?
I was just thinking that, as somebody who has pretensions to writing realistic fiction, I was just thinking that during the heart of the pandemic back in March, my partner quarantined himself. And I really missed him for like about 3 weeks. And and then, when we got back together, it kind of reinvigorated in a way and made us appreciate each other more. And I can see writing about that. I can see writing about the pandemic from hopefully that better future that we're all looking forward to.
Right.
But other than that, I'm sorry, I don't have any great insights.
No, that's good. Donna, what about you? Will your writing change?
I don't think so. I'm kind of with the group in that I have to believe that we're going to make it through this, that this is not going to be our new normal forever. It's because I have a wonderful partner who has managed to deal with me through this, and I can't imagine trying to start over and meet somebody and going through that in a situation like this. So I know I've already read some really special things that I was like, wow, like a short story with D. Jackson Lee that came out. She really opened my eyes a little bit to some of the things that could happen with that. But I don't think that I want to spend too much time in this world.
I hear that. Melissa, what about you? Will it change?
I don't think it's going to be something that I overtly write about, like have the quarantine romance, but I can see little ways that it could subtly nudge me in direction to write more touching, more flirting, more, just because we're craving all of that human interaction right now. So I can see myself layering that in a bit more just to satisfy kind of our own sense of need in this difficult time, but probably nothing overt.
Gotcha. Morgan, what about you?
No, I don't think anything's going to change. Maybe I might be inspired in 20 years. Right now, it's still way too soon. So we're still going to get all the feel good, happily ever after, angst stuff from me.
Yep, that makes sense. All right, here's an interesting question. Do you think, this is from Kimberly Cooper Griffin, do you think that the happily ever aspect of LGBTQI plus romance genre is different than the traditional male-female happily ever after? And do you think that the LGBTQI plus romance genre has influenced male-female heterosexual? That's interesting to me.
Wow.
Melissa, why don't you take that one first?
I'm thinking about the influence question. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I think I would like to know myself what the answer is. Do I think the happily ever after is different? I think it's more important than ever.
Okay.
I think there is enough difficulty with our young people figuring out who they are, looking for their acceptance, that we need the happily ever after to show them, you know, it gets better, you're going to have your happy, you're going to find your person, and life has so much to offer you. And so I think that's reflected in email that I receive on a daily basis where people say, I live in a country where I can't be who I am, and these books are saving me. And so I'm sure that applies to the straight romances in some aspect, but not in the same way. So I think that there's a dire need there.
Okay. Lee, what do you think?
Wow, I'm learning a lot by just listening to the other panelists. I'm just so impressed. I hope that's true, that gay romance novels, especially for young people and closeted people everywhere, give them hope that they can be open and that they can find this this happily ever after, or happy for now. But I was thinking about the influence question too, and I don't know about it in literature and in writing, but I know that in conversation with my straight friends, I've certainly tried to make it clear that gay people do have a lot to teach heterosexual people, and especially when it comes to the inequality of men and women in relationships, that I think gay people have set an example in their pairings of what a more equal kind of ideal pairing can look like. For all the reasons that the panelists have mentioned so far about even just defining what your happily ever after is. It's not the wedding ring and the bouquet thrown over the shoulder. It's something that we work out for ourselves and that each of us work on and agree on together. And I don't know if that can influence the heterosexual world through our literature, but I know that we're doing it through conversation.
Definitely. Donna, do you think there's an influence back and forth?
I don't have very much experience with the written heterosexual romances. But I know that just in, some of the news feed and some of that going on right now when we're talking about quarantine and families having to learn how to adjust to being home and work balance now, and, caring for children and whose roles are what. I've already heard a lot of really positive spin on how LGBT relationships have already, we already do that. We don't have the same ideas of what roles are. And so there is more balance in how, chores or child caring or any of those other things are actually more balanced in those relationships than I think ideally they have, been historically in heterosexual relationships. So kind of like Lee was saying, part of the conversation around, the differences in the relationships, I think really lends to that, being able to be that influence.
Okay. Yay, and Shade is back. We missed you so much while you were gone.
Sorry.
It's actually a good question for you because you have said that you. This is a good question for you because you said that you hetero romance.
Yes.
So talking about whether or not hetero romance and LGBTQ romance influence each other in the happily ever after.
No.
Not at all, huh?
No. I think with LGBTQ romance, because of the difficulty of that relationship itself, it lends more to the emotional love that the het romances don't. You can take the het romance and be physical with it and have love with it, and it could be all wonderful and beautiful. But I think the intensity of an LGBTQ romance is better than a het romance.
Okay, interesting. Morgan, did I hit you with this question or no?
No, I'm still thinking.
You've had plenty of time to think.
No, I agree with what Melissa said, that I feel like it's more important just because we've seen over, like with TV shows and movies, often the queer character gets killed off. So I think it's really important for us to, I mean, we only have power within our own stories, but to kind of overshadow all those deaths that we lost, and that, you know, as a queer person, you can't have a happily ever after. So yeah, I think it's more important for us to have that.
Okay, and Kris?
I think everybody has said everything.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so there's another question from the audience that I thought was interesting. It says, how do you work with the assumption that there's supposed to be one right person for everyone? Is that part of your formula or not? So Kris, why don't you start with that one?
No, I don't think so. I think that's why we have so many different tropes, you know, friends to enemies. I just don't feel that that's how I approach it. I sometimes the characters kind of stumble into love, you know, and sometimes they look at the person like, oh, I can never date this person because of whatever reason, and then they end up falling in love, and they end up, you know, having the lake house or whatever. So it doesn't ring true for me. But
And ...
I have plenty more books to write. It's one of those where anything can happen, and I'm a pantster, so I really don't know what's going to happen. So,
Gotcha. Morgan, what about you?
I'm torn because I want to, as a reader, I want to think that that is their special person. They're going to be with them forever. But then when Lee is talking about, well, it's good for this point in time. So I think that might be applicable to some of the characters I've written, where they help each other for that moment in time, and maybe they don't end up, you know, 80 years old and still together. I haven't really thought about it that far because it's kind of grim. I just want to assume that they're happy together, but we don't know. So
Right.
Yeah, I'm torn on that.
Okay. Melissa, do you think that do you write with the idea that there's one right person?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And I would sit here thinking about it just from an individual point of view as myself moving through the world. And I'm not even sure from that perspective, you know, there's the movie Kissing Jessica Stein, and she says, I don't think that there's one person. I think there's like seven. And I believe it when I hear that as Melissa moving through the world. But listen, in my romance novels, there is one person for everyone. They're find each other by the time we turn to that last page.
That's it. Just one.
Just one.
Donna, what about for you? Is there just one?
Absolutely not. I think that we're kind of, my writing, my characters are like, I use the word damaged. They have a lot of trauma going on in their lives. They may have already lost a love. Maybe they've, you know, some kind of tragedy or something like that. So I have to believe that, you know, once you may have had this wonderful relationship in your life, and if, you know, whatever life circumstance comes your way, if that person is taken from you, that you can still have that hope, that you can still have, still someone out there, you know, life isn't over.
Right. And is there just one?
I don't think so. In my upcoming novel, there's a love triangle. So I think it depends on where the person is in their life and what they're going through, and what maybe that one person in their life can give them compared to what someone else can give them. So which is the battle that the character is going through. So I think, no, there's not that one person. It ends with that one person, but, you know, yeah.
Journey.
Yeah. Lee, do you think there's just one?
I kind of agree with what Ann just said, but you know, I kind of adamantly think, because again, this pretense of realism that I have, that no, of course not. There's no such thing as happily ever after, and there's no such thing as the perfect person that was sent down from God to be your perfect lover. But in my real life, I am in the happy circumstance later in life of, I think I have found my person who I was meant to be with after decades and decades of serial monogamy. You know, I have found the person I think the angels sent down for me to be with. So again, I don't know what to say, Georgia. That's so messed up.
That's romance right there. So you can write romance, Lee.
Yeah, I think Lee has been converted.
He's in denial.
Or do we make a romance writer out of you? Right. Does angst make for a better HEA in the end? Or can you have an interesting happily ever after without any angst? That's actually a really good one. Morgan, start us off with that.
I like angst. I have angst in all my stories. So I would say, at least for me writing the story, yes. But I don't need angst when I read it, the story.
Okay, all right. Donna, I suspect you write a lot of angst.
Lots of angst. Yeah. Yeah, nothing simple. I like to, I like to read sweet. I just can't write it.
Do you think it makes for a better happily ever after?
Better? I think I find more fulfillment in writing it.
Okay.
It's that you kind of, you know, the catharsis kind of thing, the therapist in me just can't stay away from. So that's kind of where I lean. I'm not going to say it's the best, you know, that it has to be one way, but that's where I prefer.
All right. Kris, you're a little angsty.
What? You think so? I think I'm the exact opposite. I think I'm pretty fluffy.
I don't know. Maybe you fall in the middle between fluffy and angsty.
Yeah, because when I read angst, I get panicky because it's like I can't. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, oh, what's gonna why? And then it gets resolved, and then it's like, why? Because then something else happens, and it's just like I was reading when I read Melissa's latest book. You know, I'm thinking, okay, here's the big thing, and so I read it, and I was like, okay, I knew this was gonna happen, and then it's like, what? And something else happens, and then another thing happened, and I'm like, what is happening? Because like Melissa's always my go-to for my, okay, I just need a good, you know, just a nice, easy story that maybe has one thing that's angsty, and she surprised me, so it's kind of a shock. But usually if my books and being angsty, it's maybe just one thing, you know, it's just usually one thing, and then finding resolution for that one thing is really what my books are about. So it might be a big thing, but usually I don't stagger my angst. It's usually like, bam, there it is, and it's resolved.
All right. I find with Melissa's books, it's like, this book has some angst, this book has some angst, this book has a lot of angst.
Yes, I agree.
So Melissa, do you think that makes for a better happily ever after if there's more angst, or no?
Yeah, well, I think it raises the stakes, right? It makes the journey a little more well-rounded, and it comes with some texture. And I think it's, you know, when you go through rough stuff together, it strengthens your bond to another human. You hear about people who, you know, are trapped in an earthquake, who are strangers, and suddenly they're bonded for life because they had this traumatic thing happen between them. But so I think angst is good. I think I vacillate between low angst and moderate angst, just depending on the journey and the characters. But yeah, it's helpful to have it in there. I think as a reader, I'm a sucker for it.
And what about you? Do you think it makes for a better HEA or no?
I'm going to say ditto to Melissa.
Most people do. Lee, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think, I don't know about how it relates to happily ever after, but I certainly think that most literature, most fiction is about angst. Like it's often about a character who wants to go forward, may even have a very, very sunny outlook toward life, and then confronts angst at every turn, you know, it just kind of goes back to what Donna was saying, that, you know, maybe we all like the idea of sweetness being out there, but being on this planet, we got to grapple with angst. There ain't no two ways about it.
Yep. There's been some interesting stuff in the chat bar, because one person says that Kris has 2 pages of angst, and that's enough. It's there and it's gone, and that's a nice little bow.
Boom, done.
And then someone else kind of mirrors what you said, Lee, is how can you grow if you don't have angst? So I think that's kind of interesting. All right, we got time for one more question, and then I'm going to give you all a chance to tell me what you're working on, and then we're going to be out of here already. All right, so it's a little polarizing. Some readers love it, some readers hate it, but it's a great way to wrap up your happily ever after. Epilogues, do you write them or do you not write them? Morgan.
So my third book, the most recent one, I guess technically it's an epilogue, but I don't label it as an epilogue because, like Kris with angst, that's how I am with epilogues. I get scared and then I close it, because oftentimes it ends very well and I'm like, I don't need the extra. So I just trick people into reading it by calling it chapter 17, and
It works.
yeah.
And what about you, epilogue or no?
Yes, I love epilogues. It's like wrapping it up in a tight little box with a bow and giving it to the readers, like, okay, here's your happily ever after, and calling it a day.
Perfect. Donna, do you love them or do you hate them?
I find them necessary, especially with the level of angst that I throw at you. So, like in my latest one, is Last Days of Autumn, you have a main character who has cancer, and you know, to have the happily ever after, we need to know she lives. So, you know, I mean, we had to, you know, jump forward a little bit and say, we're still here, we're doing good.
Right. Kind of important.
Yeah.
Kris, how about you?
100%. I believe in them. I write them. I think it's important. The readers want that. You know, they don't want the story to end. We don't want the story to end. At least not the romance to end. So, you know, I like to always like put it like 6 months or a year in the future, just to let everybody know, guess what? We're still together. We made it. I think they're important. And it's funny because if I don't have one, everybody lets me know. Why didn't you write an epilogue for this? Where's the epilogue? We need to know that they're okay. And I'm like, trust me, they're okay. They're still together. Nothing's happened. Everything's great. But I did write, one of my books did not have an epilogue, and I still hear about it.
It's funny because I find that the people who hate epilogues are quiet, and the people who love epilogues are very loud.
Right, right.
Melissa, love them or hate them?
Oh, love them, absolutely. I need that reassurance. Kris just used the word trust, and I don't trust you. I need evidence. If we're going to go to trial, we need evidence to win this trial. So you're going to tell me they're happy. That's great. Show me the evidence.
Lee, what do you think about an epilogue?
I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough about romance as a genre to recognize the importance or unimportance of epilogues, but I do agree with what Morgan said, that when in my own novels, if I have the temptation to write an epilogue, I disguise it as the last chapter. It's an epilogue in disguise.
Right.
May I say one thing before we go, so in case I don't get a chance?
Go for it.
That this panel has really, truly inspired me in terms of, I don't think I'm going to become a romance writer, sorry. But I certainly want to look at some of the books of the panelists, and I certainly am just mega impressed by the sophistication of my fellow writers here. I have to confess I didn't expect this level of sophistication, and I feel kind of like a bumpkin. I mean, this is real. I mean, seriously, the serious talk about relationships and the relationship to real life surprised me, threw me for a huge curve, and I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed meeting all of you.
Well, good. We appreciate that. So let's stay on you, Lee. We've got another minute. What are you working on right now? Anything?
Yeah, I have a new book coming out. It's called Coming to Life on South High. And it is what I hope is kind of a gay version of those huge novels, the European novels that were called Bildungsroman, that were about a person, how somebody became who they are. Okay. It's kind of It's not that heavy though. It's not that long either, but it follows a young man from 20 to 30, and it does have a lot of romance in it, but unfortunately a lot of the romances don't work out too well. One
Lee,
does
come
though.
on.
One does.
Come on, Lee.
It has, what's that term? Happily for now?
For now.
There will be some happily for now.
All right,
Yes.
Donna, what are you working on? Donna, what are you working on?
I'm kind of at a screeching halt. I have a lot of things in queue, but if I had to be honest, I'm working on rebuilding my kitchen. I'm down to the subfloor, and we're hoping to have some place to eat before the end of the month.
Well, there'll be a happily ever after.
Luckily, my wonderful spouse has not filed for divorce yet, but if I don't get this kitchen done, it's questionable.
I have been there and done that with the kitchen. I wish you luck.
Yeah.
Morgan, what are you working on?
I'm working on my 4th novel. It's called Before, After, Always. It's going to be emotional and angsty, an epilogue in disguise, and that should come out probably next summer or fall.
Awesome. Anne, how about you? What you got in the cooker?
I'm working on a historical romance, takes place during the Harlem Renaissance, and it's got gangsters and drag masquerade balls and all sorts of excitement and love.
That sounds awesome. Melissa, what's coming up the pike?
I'm working on the Tangle Valley romances. I have book 1 that just came out. Book 2 is finishing up in editing, and I'm writing 3 now. After that, I have a standalone called Marry Me, and you'll have to check it out.
Awesome. And Kris, how about you? What do you got?
Well, I just turned in page proofs for Home that comes out in October, and now I'm writing this little gem, Britt Ryder. It's a cover reveal. Yay! So I'm working on that, and that comes out in June of 2021.
Nice. All right, that's all the time we got. Thank you for participating. You guys were awesome. Thanks for you who watched. Thank you so much for spending your Friday with us. This has been amazing.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.